Welcome to a new Livewire series entitled The Love Devotion. And we're going to talk about how to fall in love with God, which seems like an odd thing to say. How do you fall in love with God? Surely it just happens naturally, doesn't it? I don't know if you've ever been in love. I'm looking around thinking probably not, most of you I would imagine, but I'm not joking. Sorry, Mark, I apologise. I remember falling in love with Lynn a long time ago. We first met in church. I was giving out hymn books and Lynn walked in. And it was kind of odd because somebody had once said to me, how will you know there's revival, Paul? And I said, I don't know. Why are you asking me? I said, but I imagine all sorts of people will walk in. And I used to be a punk. So I said, I would imagine a girl will walk in, she'll have beautiful blue eyes, black spiky hair, and I'll probably marry her. And about 3 months later, I was giving out hymn books, and this beautiful woman walks in. And then just after that, Lynn walked in, and she had black spiky hair. No, I'm joking. Lynn walked in, she had beautiful blue eyes and black spiky hair, and we got to know each other. And our first dates, Lynn had a car, so we went on our first date, and one of the back lights wasn't working, and we went for a drive in the hills, and we got pulled over by the police. And so the policeman came behind us, and our car was in front on the top of the hill, and just behind us was the police. And we knew the back light wasn't working. What we didn't know was the handbrake wasn't working as well. So Lynn winds down the window, and the policeman's asking her all these questions. Why are you out here? What's going for a drive? And Lynn panics because Lynn's a good girl and she doesn't like getting in trouble. So she would keep asking me questions. Literally, he would say, have you been drinking? She'd look at me, no, we're not been drinking. No, we're not been drinking. At one point, he said, what's your name? And she looked at me. It's the honest truth. Lynn. And then gradually, we noticed the policeman was moving to the right, gradually. And it sped up, and there was an almighty crash. And we banged into the front of the police car. That was our first ever date. And, when I first got to know Lynn, I didn't fall immediately in love with her. I fancied her, as we say in England. I just found her really, really attractive. And gradually, I fell in love with her. But how do you know if you're in love with God? Is it a feeling? Is it like you're in a worship service and you can feel in love with God? What does it feel like to be in love with God? So why fall in love with God? I'm going to choose a passage to build this live wire around that may not be the passage you would automatically think of, especially when I say to you, we're going to talk about Peter's relationship with Jesus and how Peter fell in love. There may be a different passage that you might think of that comes to your mind straight away when we talk about the subject of love. But let me turn you to this passage. This is when Jesus talks to Peter, and Peter walks out on the lake. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it is I, don't be afraid. Lord, if it is you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. Come, he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. So when we read that story, often the context is faith. I don't think this story is about faith. Peter gets out, but because of his lack of faith, he starts to sink. Peter didn't get out because of faith. Peter got out of the boat because of love. He wanted to be with Jesus. And I believe it was love that drove him to get up and go and be with Jesus. Now, obviously, it took faith as well. But love conquers fear. There are two base emotions, psychologists say, two base emotions behind all our emotions. You show me a happy person, and I'll show you someone who's in love, because love is one of those base emotions. Love and not fear. Love and fear are the key emotions. You show me someone who's angry, and I'll show you someone who's afraid of someone or losing something. When someone's angry, there's something deeper than just simply anger quite often. There's a fear of something. But love conquers fear. They were afraid, they were in the boat, but I believe it's Peter's love that got him out of that boat. It conquered that fear. So a great question to ask ourselves is, what is it that we're afraid of? And how can love help us get beyond that fear? When Lynn and I lived many, many years ago, we lived in a house, and it was quite a kind of difficult area, kind of a rundown area. And our next door neighbour had two boyfriends, and she would kind of like intermingle them. One would be in favour for 6 months, and then he would be gone. And the next one would be in, and then he would be gone. And over a period of years, they would come in and out every 6 months, these two young men. And one day, the young lady's little boy knocked on our door and said, Paul, come. And he mentioned this young man, David's attacking my mum. And I came out of my house and I walked in and I saw something that terrified me. He was there with a machete. Now, what you have to understand about me is I hate blood, especially my own. I don't like needles. I have issues with stuff. I fainted, not because I saw blood, but because someone talked to me about blood once. That's how bad I am. I once pushed a trolley into a nurse to move away from me, and I was 40 years old at the time. I'm terrified I just hate blood. I hate anything medical. If you talk to me, I remember when I did some pastoral work in the early days, and I'd go and people would talk to me about their operations, and I'd be gripping onto the table, trying to stay upright. I hated it. So I walk into this room, and David, this man, is going absolutely ballistic. He's very frustrated with his girlfriend. He's got a machete. She's terrified. He sees me. He runs to me. He lifts up the machete. And just before he goes to hit me, he looks in my eyes and he stops. I did this. And he started to chop into his arm. And there was blood absolutely everywhere. He basically tried to kill himself. And then he ran out of the house. I remember, because I cared about David, we knew him. I ran out after him, grabbed hold of him, pulled him back into the house. We put bandages on him, and even now I'm feeling faint because I remember putting my hands on his arms and I could feel the blood, kind of like the pulsating, that's a horrible feeling. Okay, you're having trouble as well, I can see. So I hated it, it was horrible. And yet what made me do that was love that conquered my fear. And so love conquers fear. And I think that's something for us to remember. There are many things that God is going to ask us to do in our lives, but what does love really look like? Jesus never asked Peter. He didn't say, Peter, I really want you to come out here. But Peter just wanted to be with Jesus. Many years ago, I was listening to a pastor, and he said, do you love Jesus? And everyone in the church went, yeah, we love Jesus. Whoa, yeah, 2 thumbs up. And then he started to ask some other questions. He said, well, do you love Jesus compared to your car? Yeah, of course we do. We all love Jesus compared to our car. Okay, fantastic. Do you love Jesus compared to your hobbies? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love this, I love that. But I love Jesus. But as he got going through the list, the crowd or the congregation became a little bit quieter. Do you love Jesus compared to church? Well, yeah, of course we love him more than church. What about compared to your politics? At this point, things got a little bit quieter. And then when he said this final one, it went very quiet. Do you love Jesus compared to your children? That was really difficult. Now, I'm not sure that question really helps, because I don't think Jesus is going to say, well, it's necessarily, you've got to get rid of your children if you're going to love me. Obviously, Jesus talked about it in terms of discipleship, but he was using hyperbole to make a point about discipleship and being prepared to follow Jesus. But the reality is, I'm not sure this is a super helpful question, but I'm going to ask you to make a comparison. I'm going to ask you this question. Do you love Jesus compared to this time last year? Is your love for Jesus growing? Is it going in the right direction? And what would that actually look like? Now, to answer this question, we're going to look at the passage that maybe you first thought of when you thought about Peter and Jesus and the conversation about love. Let me read it to you. When they'd finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said, you know I love you. Jesus said, feed my lambs. Again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He answered, yes, Lord, you know I love you. Jesus said, take care of my sheep. The third time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my sheep. So if you've ever heard anybody talk about this passage, they make a big deal about the Greek words, don't they? I don't know if you've heard people talk about this. There's a change in the Greek language for the word love that's used here. I'm going to show you what I mean by that. But my little caveat is this, and not everybody will like me for saying this, but the fact is Jesus and Peter didn't talk in Greek. They didn't speak to each other in Greek. And sometimes I'm slightly concerned about how much weight we put on the Greek word, which is the translation into Greek. So we have to be aware of that. But there is a dynamic happening here that I do think in context with the rest of the Bible is really helpful for us when we think about how we fall in love with God. So let me just show you a table of the words that are being used here. There are various different words and they get changed and interchanged in the Greek in this story. Not just the word love, but the command and the action that Jesus gives to Peter as well. But let me help you focus on the words in blue and in green. At first, in the Greek, Jesus says, do you agape me? This divine love, this full love, the kind of love that God has for us. Peter, do you love me with the same kind of love I have for you? To which Peter replies, yes, I love you, philia. In other words, I love you with a kind of more human love, a kind of more brotherly love. Then Jesus asked him again, in the Greek we see it as, do you agape me? To which Peter replies, yes, I phileo. The third time, Jesus asked him, and we know why Peter's upset. It's nothing to do with these words. The reason Peter's upset is because he asked the third time. It's like, surely you know I love you. What you notice, though, is in the Greek at least, Jesus uses a different word. Do you phileo love me? Yes, I phileo love you. Now, you can draw different things from that. What I draw from that is, whether it's a coincidence or not, I see something I've noticed in my relationship with God, which is this. God shows us the ideal. This is where I want you to be, but I'm going to meet you where you are. And I think what's important about us falling in love with God is not how much do you love God right now, but in which direction is your love for God going? Are you falling more in love with God? Are you more in love with God now than you used to be in the past? Now, in this series, we're going to look in the next 2 episodes of what that might look like. What does it look like to be in love with God? We know through other Pais teaching or teaching that we've talked about is this idea of kavana, this concept, this Jewish concept of kavana, to have an awareness of God's purpose and presence in what we do. But the word kavana means direction of the heart. And if you look at some of the other teaching we have, what you'll see, of course, is that pretty much everything Jesus ever talks about had this concept of kavana within it. This idea of the direction of your heart when you do something. Are we growing closer in love with God? And what would that look like? Are you more in love with God than you were this time last year? Now, I'm in love with Lynn. I'm more in love with Lynn than I was 34 years ago. But it doesn't mean I feel the same kind of love for Lynn as I did 34 years ago. Every so often I do. I get that tingly feeling when she walks in the room. But my love is deeper now. It's different now. And that's one of the things I want to just concentrate on for a moment. How do you fall deeper in love with God? Well, I want to say this. In reality, you choose to. It's a choice. You choose to fall in love with God. Let me look at those 3 words a little bit. You. If you're going to fall in love with God, here's what we know. God's not going to become more attractive. He's not going to go away, put on some lipstick, put on a new outfit and make himself more attractive. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He is who he is. Unchangeable, wonderful, certainly worth falling head over heels in love with. But if there's any change, it's got to be something to do with us. Now, the Bible, of course, says that the fruit of the Spirit is love. So the Holy Spirit in us develops our love in some way for God. But there's still an element where we have to actively get engaged in that. The second word here is choose. You choose to love. Now, if you're married, you'll know this. Just because you're married, just because you have a spouse, doesn't mean your spouse is not going to be attracted to somebody else. You know, I remember talking to a young lady once, and she was shocked that her husband might find anybody else attractive once they've got married. And then she kind of lied and said, I never find anybody else ever attractive. And I'm thinking, I'm not sure that's probably true. But it's a choice. You know, we often hear preachers say, well, there's a God-shaped hole in every one of us that only God can fill. Well, I would say that's mainly true, not completely, because the reality is God's put eternity in our hearts. So the full truth is there's a God-shaped hole in you that God can only fill, only God can fill, but God needs eternity to fill it. That's why many Christians will still chase things in this life, because the things he's put in our heart will only ever be fulfilled in eternity. But he also looked at man and said, man's got a perfect relationship with me right now in the Garden of Eden, but he still needs someone else. So there's a Lynn-shaped hole in my heart that only Lynn can fill. Now that requires a choice. That means there are conversations I will only ever have with Lynn and nobody else, and especially no other woman. There are things I will only ever say to Lynn. There are feelings I will only ever share with Lynn. And if I feel somebody's opening up too much with me and it's somebody of the opposite sex, I'll normally back away a little bit. Because it's a choice. It's a choice. Have I been attracted to other women? Of course. Has she been attracted to other men? I don't know how that could be possible, but it probably is. But then there's a choice, isn't there? It's the same with God. There's a choice. There are things I will only tell God, I won't tell Lynn. There are conversations I'll only ever have with God. And you might not even suspect I have those conversations. But those conversations, those sharings of how I feel with God are the things that bind me close to him. So it's a choice. You choose to. To do what? What is it that you choose to do? If we're going to fall in love with God deeper, how do you do that? Well, in Revelation it talks about a church that lost its first love with God. And I don't know if you remember the advice that was given to that church through the Holy Spirit, where it was repent and do the things you did at first. Repent and do the things you did at first. If we're going to fall deeper in love with God, we need to do the things that we would do if we're deeper in love with God, and not necessarily wait for the feelings to come. In the Shema prayer, which is probably the most important Jewish prayer, I don't know if you remember it, but it goes a bit like this. It's found in Deuteronomy. It says, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. Now, in English, we separate the heart from the brain. Yes? But in Hebrew, there's no word for brain. There's only the word for heart. So we think heart, feelings, brain, thoughts. When you read heart anywhere in the Bible, it's not talking predominantly about feelings. It's always talking about the inner man, the thoughts and desires of someone. And this word that we use here, leviv or levav, for heart, is talking about the inner person. Quite often it seems to me it's thoughts that lead to feelings. Not every single time. But if you look up heart, the way it's used in the Bible, sometimes it is about feelings. More often it's about understanding and thoughts and choices. And so if we're going to fall deeper in love with God, you have to do something. It's a choice. And one of the big principles is to do what you would do if you fall in love with someone. So you'd spend time in their presence, wouldn't you? You'd talk to them. You'd listen to them. You'd give them time. If you fall in love with someone, we'll talk about this in another episode, it's a real problem because sometimes you're good for nothing else. It's all you can think of. And so we need to ask, well, what's that process look like? So in the next 2 episodes, I'm going to share with you my journey of falling deeper in love with God. I would say I've gone through 4 stages of falling in love with God. And as I go through that, you can look and think, well, is this something that I love God about? One thing I'll say to you is this: if you're going to fall in love with someone, you don't fall deeper in love with them just by falling in love with that one quality you first fell in love with them. So I'm not a lot deeper in love with Lynn because I find it even funnier now than when I first met her, because one of the reasons I love her is because she's so funny. Or I find it even prettier now than I first found her pretty. I still find her just as pretty and just as funny, but I've learned other things about her. And that's what we're going to look at, is what are the different things you're finding out, you're understanding about God that you love him for. Final thought on this is really simple, just a simple caveat. I'm going to show you my process or my journey, doesn't mean that's your journey. The overall aim of this series is to ask you to think about the fact of, am I falling deeper in love with God? And if so, what would that look like? And what are the other qualities about God I can love him for, apart from the ones I already love him for? Okay, so let's do what we normally do. Let's collaborate. Let's download the document, discuss the questions, and disciple others in what we've just learnt. And next time, we're going to look at the 4 loves that at least I've experienced with God.
Hi, we hope that you enjoyed this episode of Livewire. If you're interested in learning more about this topic, I'd like to recommend mypais.com, where you can find more episodes on this subject.